So you talk about the media sort of either missing these stories or purposefully avoiding these stories hypothetically. What advice would you have for someone like me or other people in media who want to cover this in a way that is going to be productive, that helps people engage in these sorts of issues, these sorts of movements going forward?
Get your butt out of Washington, get your butt out of New York. I was a foreign correspondent for the New York Times. I worked in Saigon, I worked in Cairo, I worked in Moscow, I worked in Paris. I worked in probably 30 or 40 countries. I learned very early on as a foreign correspondent, you cannot cover a country well if you sit in the capital. You gotta get out in the country, you gotta cover it. And look at the Washington today, look at the Washington press corps today. It is Trump obsessed. Now, I'm not saying Trump isn't important. Let's say Trump and the Washington story is 75% of the American political story. I'm sorry, there's another 25% that's being ignored. You got to get out there. And you have to have managing editors, executive producers, people saying, we're not getting the story. This guy Smith, other people are telling us a story we don't know anything about. Get out there and find out about it. If you assign really good reporters to cover the democracy rebellion, however you want to call it, around this country, they will come back to you with stories and you will start to run them. What you got to do is to break out of the repertorial habits you're in. Let me tell you, covering a Trump tweet is easy. It's just like on a local coverage. If you've got a police radio, you listen to the fire engines and you go send your cameraman after the fire truck and you cover the fire and you got great pictures on TV and you say, wow, we really did a great job. No, the answer is you didn't do a great job. You covered something that was obvious. Maybe if it's a really big fire and there are really problems with the city fire code or the fire department isn't working right, then maybe you're into a good story. But the chances are you've just thrown up something on your television screen, or you've just covered a tweet that is going to be overthrown by a tweet tomorrow or in 3 hours or simply forgotten. Come on. I mean, there's a lot of coverage that's going on inside of Washington, inside the Beltway. And there's an awful lot of talk show stuff going on. Pal, you've probably got it on your program. We've got it on lots of programs. I've stopped watching cable news because the talk shows are so repetitive. You got the same bunch of people sitting around a table in a panel talking about the same news, knowing no more, having done no more reporting, haven't learned anything more. I mean, reporting is about getting out and talking to people and getting out of the box you've been sitting in and actually learning something. Listen, years ago, I wrote a book about Russia called The Russians. It was a worldwide bestseller because people hadn't actually taken a look at the Russians. I spent a lot of time with them. I wrote a book 6 years ago called Who Stole the American Dream, about how we got into the inequality and the dysfunctional political system we have now. And lots of other people have gotten on that bandwagon now. But we sat there for 30 years as a national media, not covering the growing inequality of American economy and the American society. We watched factories close. We watched jobs go across the world to China, to India, the Philippines, to Korea, wherever. And we reported it as one story at a time. We reported one factory. We reported 500 people losing their jobs. We didn't get to it until there was Occupy Wall Street. It took a social movement to wake up the media to the most obvious and the biggest story in American society over 3 decades. What I'm saying is we got to get out of our groove. We got to get out of our track and go look for something other that's going on. Ask people what's going on in their backyards. It's there. It can be found. And it's a great story. It's fascinating. It's probably the most interesting, compelling story about American politics in a long time. And it fits American history. If you go back and look at the progressive era, when women got the right to vote, when we got direct election of senators, when Teddy Roosevelt was busting corporations, and in 1907, when Congress actually passed a law to ban corporate donations to campaigns, 1907. That was going on. Then we got another wave in the 1960s. We had the civil rights movement. We had the women's movement. We had the environmental movement. We had the anti-war movement. We had all kinds of ferment going on. This happens periodically at the grassroots in American history. And I think we're into one of those periods now. And it's up to us in the media to be smart enough to go find the stories and get out of the pull that's so dynamic and so attractive and so seductive and maybe not only infectious, but it's habit forming of just sitting in Washington and covering what I call the war of words. Most of what's going on in Washington is words. People are arguing about words. Everyone's lying down. When you go kill an Iranian general, that's not words, that's action. But what's going on out in the countryside, and a lot of times it's action. When there's gerrymander reform, it's going to make a difference in who gets elected. It's going to make a difference in who's in what the agenda is in the legislature. In Connecticut, they have a system of public funding of campaigns. People who could never think about running for office, middle class whites and blacks, professional people who couldn't afford to raise the money to run for a campaign are suddenly in office. And today in the Connecticut legislature, you have an African-American woman who grew up in poverty, was on food stamps at one point, runs a nonprofit for African-American women with breast cancer, and she is in her 4th term and chairman of the Legislative Committee on Health and Social Policy. Can you imagine the impact on policy, on the decisions, on the action of the legislature of that? And it's happened all over the place. There are 3 times as many minority representatives. There are twice as many women as there used to be before this system changed. So this is real change. It's not just talk, and people are doing it. And the great thing is, one guy from Florida said to me, he said, you know, we have gerrymander reform in Florida. If we can do it in Florida, you can do it in your state. I love that.
Well, Hedrick Smith, I appreciate that advice, and also your recent work. Everyone should definitely go check it out, and thank you for joining us on the show today.
It's on PBS all across the country this month. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you. For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.